Daniel Whitmore sat at the worn kitchen table of his modest two-bedroom home, swirling coffee in a chipped mug. 5 years. It still didn't feel real. Laura had been everything, his partner, his anchor. After her death, the house had become a tomb filled with her echoes. The town had moved on, of course. People stopped whispering. They stopped asking if he was doing okay. Daniel had even started dating again, a little, but nothing serious. Nothing that touched the place Laura had occupied. That evening, Daniel received an unexpected call from a private investigator named Charles Denton, hired by a bank to locate missing heirs tied to an old inheritance. Denton asked Daniel strange questions about Laura, her family background, her maiden name, whether she had siblings. Slightly annoyed but cooperative, Daniel answered as best he could. 2 days later, Denton called again, his voice strained. "Mr. Whitmore, we found her. She's alive. In Fairpoint, Nebraska." Daniel nearly dropped the phone. "That's impossible," he muttered. "She's dead. I buried her." "No, sir. She's alive, and she's using a different name now. Lauren Daniels." The investigator's voice hardened. "You should probably come and see for yourself." Daniel booked a ticket the same night. As the Greyhound bus rumbled across the flat Midwest, Daniel stared out the window, mind reeling. Was it a mistake? A misunderstanding? Or had Laura lied? The bus wheezed to a stop at the Fairpoint depot, a lonely platform overshadowed by barren trees and the low, gray sprawl of winter clouds. Daniel stepped out into the chilled air, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his jacket. This town, smaller than Clearwater, felt eerily untouched by time, a frozen capsule of peeling storefronts and creaking porch swings. Charles Denton was waiting for him, a tall, wiry man with a rumpled coat and sharp, watchful eyes. Without much ceremony, Denton ushered him into a battered sedan and drove him through a maze of back roads. "She works at a diner on Main Street," Denton said, eyes flickering to the rearview mirror. "Goes by Lauren Daniels, single, keeps to herself." Daniel's stomach knotted. "Are you sure it's her?" "I ran facial recognition. 98% match. It's her, Daniel." When they pulled up to the diner, Daniel didn't get out immediately. He just stared through the windshield. The bell above the door chimed softly every time a customer entered. A few waitresses bustled inside. Then, there she was, Laura. She wore a simple blue uniform dress and carried a tray across the floor. Her hair was darker, shorter, and her posture had changed, a little more guarded, less buoyant. But it was her, no doubt. Daniel's throat tightened. His mind reeled with 1,000 questions, but one shouted louder than the rest. "Why?" Denton leaned closer. "You sure you want to do this?" Daniel nodded stiffly and got out of the car. Inside the diner, the warmth and clatter felt surreal. He slid into a booth by the window and waited. When she approached, balancing a coffee pot, she gave him a practiced, polite smile and froze. For a split second, her face drained of all color. "Coffee?" she croaked. Daniel met her eyes. "Hello, Laura." She visibly swayed, gripping the table for balance. Then almost mechanically, she poured him coffee, her hands shaking so hard that a few drops splattered on the Formica table. I don't know you," she whispered. "You do," Daniel said quietly. "You're my wife." A few nearby customers glanced over, sensing the tension. Laura, or Lauren, composed herself, breathing shallowly through her nose. "You're mistaken," she said, voice trembling. "I'm sorry." She turned on her heel and fled into the kitchen. Daniel sat there, heart hammering, his world collapsing for the second time in 5 years. Denton appeared at his side. "We should leave, now." "What the hell is going on?" Daniel hissed. "I don't know yet," Denton muttered, "but this isn't just about a woman running away." Through the kitchen window, Daniel caught a glimpse of Laura talking urgently to a man, broad-shouldered, greasy apron, tattoos up both arms, who gripped her elbow a little too tightly. Something was very wrong. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay stiff on the motel bed, staring at the stained ceiling, replaying the moment Laura looked into his eyes and pretended not to know him. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't amnesia. It was fear. The next morning, Denton knocked on his door, a manila folder tucked under his arm. "I did some digging," he said, stepping inside. He tossed the folder onto the bedspread. "The man you saw with her, his name's Travis Cole, former trucker, long record, assault, battery, intimidation. Did 5 years upstate for beating his ex-girlfriend into a coma." Daniel felt bile rise in his throat. "And now he's with her?" Denton nodded grimly. "Far as I can tell, they're living together. Apartment on the south side of town. Cheap place. He's not registered for employment, but there are cash-only gigs moving merchandise around." "Illegal?" "Probably," Denton said, "but nothing we can prove yet." Daniel's hands curled into fists. He didn't know if Laura had willingly gone with this man, or if she was trapped. Either way, he needed answers. That afternoon, Daniel parked across the street from a faded brick apartment building and waited. Around 6, Laura emerged, bundled in a thin jacket, Travis following behind her. They argued. Daniel couldn't hear words, but the body language was obvious. Travis shoved Laura hard against the wall before storming to a battered pickup truck. Daniel started forward, rage blinding him, but Denton grabbed his arm. "Don't blow it," Denton hissed. "We need to know more first." Swallowing his fury, Daniel watched as Laura wiped her face, squared her shoulders, and walked alone toward the grocery store a few blocks away. "Now's your chance," Denton muttered. Daniel approached cautiously, keeping his voice low. "Laura, please, talk to me." She flinched but didn't run. For a long moment, she just stared at him, as if weighing whether she could trust him. Finally, she whispered, "I can't. You don't understand. If he knows I talked to you?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Daniel, go home. Forget you ever saw me." "I can't," Daniel said hoarsely. "You're my wife. You don't have to stay with him. You can come with me." A small, broken laugh escaped her lips. "It's not that simple. You think I haven't tried?" Behind them, a truck door slammed. Travis stood by his pickup, watching. Laura paled. "Go. Now." Reluctantly, Daniel backed away, heart pounding as she rushed back toward the apartment. Denton pulled him aside. "She's scared for a reason," he said. "We're not just dealing with domestic violence. There's something bigger." Daniel realized with a growing sense of dread that the woman he buried wasn't the only lie. Whatever Laura was running from was darker, more dangerous, and far from over. The next morning, Daniel sat across from Denton in the corner booth of a dingy diner 2 towns over, a map of Fairpoint spread between them. "She's scared out of her mind," Daniel said. His voice was rough from a sleepless night. "Whatever Travis has on her, it's serious." Denton stirred his coffee absently. "We're missing pieces. If we want to help her, we have to understand why she faked her death in the first place." Daniel stared at the map, mind churning. "Then we start at the beginning. The crash." Denton nodded. "I pulled the accident report last night. There are inconsistencies." Daniel leaned in. "The car that went off the cliff was Laura's. Yes, registration matched, but the autopsy was rushed. The body was burned beyond recognition, and they used dental records to ID her." Denton hesitated. "Problem is Laura had dental work done 6 months earlier. Work that wasn't in her official file." Daniel blinked. Meaning the body wasn't hers. Someone switched the identification. Daniel's stomach twisted. Then whose body was it? Denton shook his head. "That's what we need to find out." Daniel sat back, stunned. The realization hit like a freight train. Laura had help. Someone orchestrated the crash. Someone covered it up. Later that day, Denton made calls to former Clearwater contacts, including the old sheriff, who had retired 2 years ago. Under careful questioning, it came out that the investigation into Laura's crash had been handled off the books. The wreck was cleared quickly. No autopsy photographs, no family viewing. It stank of a cover-up. Daniel couldn't help but wonder, had Travis been involved even back then? Driven by anger and desperation, Daniel convinced Denton to take another risk. They would search Laura's and Travis's apartment while they were at work. It was reckless, illegal, but time was slipping away. That afternoon, when Laura's shift began and Travis's truck was still gone, they picked the lock. Inside, the apartment was a mess. Dishes piled in the sink, broken blinds, the sour stench of cheap beer soaked into the carpet. But in the bedroom closet, Daniel found a shoebox buried beneath a stack of old clothes. Inside, a handful of fake IDs, all bearing Laura's face under different names. A crumpled photo of Daniel and Laura taken years ago, edges burned. A battered notebook with coded entries, and hidden under the false bottom of the box, a revolver. Daniel stared at it, blood pounding in his ears. Laura had prepared for violence. She was living in fear. Denton hissed through his teeth. "Daniel, we need to leave. Now!" As they slipped out the door, a battered pickup rumbled into the parking lot. Travis was back, and he wasn't alone. A tall man in a leather jacket and mirrored sunglasses climbed out of the passenger side, scanning the building like he was hunting something. Daniel and Denton ducked behind a dumpster, hearts racing. This wasn't just about domestic violence. Laura had entangled herself, or had been trapped, in something much bigger, something that could get them all killed. Daniel paced the motel room, the battered notebook spread across the desk under the dim yellow lamp. Denton hunched over it, frowning. "It's not straightforward," Denton said, flipping through pages covered in tight, hurried writing. "Looks like a mix of coded entries, initials, dates, cash amounts, possibly meeting times or drop-offs." Daniel peered over his shoulder. The initials kept repeating, TC, LJ, RP. Next to some of them were locations, addresses in Nebraska, Missouri, even Oklahoma. "Drug runs?" Daniel asked quietly. "Could be, or something worse." Denton's mouth tightened. "This looks organized. Laura wasn't just running from Travis. She's tied to a network." As Daniel sifted through the pages, one entry caught his eye. March 14th, RP secured the replacement. Cleanup at Ravenwood Bluff. Burn notice issued. No loose ends. His blood ran cold. March 14th, the night Laura supposedly died in the crash. RP secured the replacement, Daniel whispered. The body. They hadn't just faked Laura's death. Someone was murdered to make it believable. RP could be that second man, Denton muttered. "We need to find out who he is." They decided to divide the work. Denton would dig into local gang activity, looking for anyone with the initials RP tied to trafficking, smuggling, or organized crime. Daniel, meanwhile, would try to reach Laura again, but more carefully this time. Late that night, Daniel left a note tucked into Laura's coat pocket at the diner. "I can help you. Meet me where we first said goodbye. Midnight." It was a gamble. Travis was suspicious by nature. If he found the note first, Daniel's life could be worth nothing. At 11:45 p.m., Daniel stood shivering behind an abandoned gas station on the edge of town, the place where he and Laura had shared their last real kiss before she died. The minutes dragged on, each creak of the wind sounding like footsteps. Then she appeared. Laura slipped around the side of the building, hood pulled low. Her eyes darted around, wide with fear. "Daniel," she whispered, "you shouldn't be here." "You faked your death," he said, "and someone else died in your place." She flinched, tears pooling instantly. "You don't understand," she rasped. "They said they'd kill you if I didn't disappear. They needed a body. They made me watch." Daniel's heart clenched painfully. "Who's they?" Before she could answer, headlights slashed across the lot. A truck. Travis. And he wasn't alone. "Run!" Laura gasped, pushing Daniel toward the woods behind the station. But Travis and the second man were already closing in. Daniel grabbed Laura's hand and yanked her into the shadows as the truck doors slammed open. Shouts erupted behind them, boots pounding on cracked pavement. "Get back here, you little—" Travis roared, followed by the crunch of gravel under heavy footsteps. Daniel and Laura sprinted toward the tree line, heartbeats thundering louder than the angry curses chasing them. Laura stumbled once, but Daniel caught her, shoving her forward into the darkness. Branches clawed at their clothes as they pushed deeper into the woods. Daniel risked a glance back. Two beams of flashlights swung wildly through the trees. Travis and the second man were following, and they were armed. "Split up!" Laura gasped. "They'll catch us both if we stay together." "No!" Daniel started, but she shoved him hard to the left and darted right. For a terrible moment, Daniel hesitated, torn between protecting her and not losing her again. But heavy footsteps closed in fast, and instinct took over. He bolted left, deeper into the woods. Behind him, Gunshots cracked the night air. Daniel didn't dare look back. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs threatened to buckle. Only when the woods grew dense and silent did he finally collapse behind a fallen log, gasping for air. Minutes passed. Then a shadow moved ahead. Denton. "I heard the shots," Denton hissed. "You okay?" Daniel nodded weakly. "Laura, they're after her." Denton's face was grim. "We'll find her, but we need to regroup." At a battered diner miles outside town, Denton laid out the next steps. "We can't outmuscle these guys. We need information, leverage. If we know what they're protecting, we can break them." Daniel's fists clenched. "What about Laura?" "We get her out, but we have to be smart. If Travis or RP think she's flipped, they'll kill her, fast." Denton pulled out his phone. "I ran a partial plate on the second guy's truck. Matches a man named Roy Peterson, former enforcer for a Kansas City outfit specializing in smuggling. Drugs, guns, maybe worse." Daniel closed his eyes. The initials in the notebook, RP, Roy Peterson. "Roy's been laying low in Fairpoint," Denton continued, "probably running a smaller network with Travis." "And Laura's caught in it," Daniel said bitterly. "Forced to fake her death, change identities, all to survive." At dawn, they searched again. Laura was nowhere at the motel, nowhere in town. It was as if she had vanished. Daniel returned to the abandoned gas station, desperately scanning for any sign of her. In the cracked glass of the broken door, taped, hastily, was a scrap of paper. One line, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "I'll find you." Daniel crumpled the note in his fist. They weren't just running from Travis now. They were running out of time. Daniel sat in Denton's car, fingers drumming against his knee as they drove aimlessly through Fairpoint's outskirts, trying to think like Laura. Where would she go when there was no safe place left? "She's trying to protect you," Denton said, voice low. "That note, it's a promise and a warning. She's going to take the risk herself rather than drag you deeper." Daniel shook his head. "She doesn't have to. Not alone." Denton's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowning. Background check on Travis came back. Something new. He wasn't just some thug. 5 years ago, he was connected to a man named Boyd Lasker. Lasker ran a protection racket out of Missouri. Went missing the same month Laura's crash happened. Daniel tensed. "You think he was the body they found?" "Possibly. But there's more. Before Lasker disappeared, he filed a report about an inside informant. Said someone close to him was leaking information to law enforcement. He was preparing to disappear. And he mentioned 2 names, Travis Cole and Laura Whitmore." Daniel's stomach turned over. "Laura was the informant." "That's my guess," Denton said grimly. "She got too close. Maybe Travis found out and turned the tables, killing Lasker, framing Laura's death, setting her up to vanish under his control." Daniel stared out the window as fields blurred by. The pieces were snapping into place, each one darker than the last. Laura hadn't just been a victim. She had tried to fight back once. She'd paid for it with her freedom. They drove toward the old industrial sector, where Denton believed Roy operated. Rows of abandoned warehouses sprawled like broken teeth against the gray sky. Somewhere among them, Laura might be hiding or being hunted. "We'll have one shot at this," Denton warned. "If they catch her again, it's over." That night, Denton made contact with a former associate, a low-level smuggler named Mark Greeley, who owed him a favor. Over beers in a grimy dive bar, Mark spilled what he knew. "Roy's setting up a final shipment," he muttered. "Big one. Drugs, maybe guns. Might be moving people, too. He's got a warehouse on Winthrop Avenue. Tomorrow night, they're clearing it out." Daniel's heart pounded. If Laura was hiding near Roy's operation, tomorrow night would be her last chance, and maybe theirs too. As they left the bar, Daniel spotted a figure across the street, a slender shape, half hidden by shadows. Laura. She caught his gaze, shook her head in warning, and disappeared down an alley before he could call out. Daniel's throat tightened. She was close, and she was still trying to save him, even now. The next day dragged like a slow burn. Every second felt sharpened with tension as Daniel and Denton prepared for that night's operation. There would be no backup, no law enforcement swooping in at the last moment. It was just them, a borrowed camera rig Denton had smuggled together from old surveillance gear and whatever luck they had left. "We get evidence first," Denton reminded him grimly. "Without it, even if we save Laura, they'll keep hunting her. We need to shut this down." The plan was simple on paper. Stake out the Winthrop Avenue warehouse, capture footage of the illegal shipment, document Travis and Roy's involvement, and extract Laura if they found her. At twilight, they parked a few blocks away, slipping into the shadows on foot. The warehouse sat at the edge of an abandoned industrial park, a hulking building of rusted steel and broken windows. 2 trucks idled outside, engines rumbling low. Men moved crates in and out. Rough voices carried on the cold air. Denton set up the camera behind a stack of pallets, while Daniel kept watch through a pair of cracked binoculars. "There's Roy," Denton murmured, zooming in, "and Travis." Both men barked orders, pushing workers faster. Some crates were marked with fake agricultural labels, but others, the ones guarded most heavily, bore no markings at all. Daniel's blood chilled. Human trafficking, guns, drugs, it didn't matter. All of it was poison. Then, movement on the far side of the lot. Laura. She wore a baggy hoodie, her face partially hidden, as she helped move a crate toward a truck. Even from a distance, Daniel could see how she flinched whenever Travis got too close. "She's a prisoner," Daniel whispered. Denton's jaw tightened. "We get the footage, then we get her." Hours seemed to stretch and collapse as they recorded everything. Crates loaded, cash exchanged, whispered threats between Roy and a man who looked like a cartel intermediary. When Denton finally nodded, "Enough to bury them," they slipped toward the far side of the building where the shadows were deepest. But they hadn't been careful enough. A sharp bark of a voice cut through the air. Flashlights snapped toward them. Travis's snarl carried through the night. "Hey, who the hell's that?" Within seconds, the whole operation erupted into chaos. Shouts, scrambling boots, guns drawn. Daniel didn't think. He sprinted toward Laura, heart hammering. She froze when she saw him, disbelief flashing across her face. "No time," he gasped. "Run!" Together they bolted for the chain-link fence at the back of the lot. Denton right behind them. Gunfire cracked in the darkness. Bullets ripped into the metal fence as Daniel shoved Laura ahead, covering her with his body. They stumbled through a gap in the fence, teeth rattling from adrenaline, and disappeared into the maze of abandoned buildings. Behind them, Travis's furious bellow echoed across the lot. "Find them. Kill them if you have to." The abandoned motel Denton chose sat 30 miles outside Fairpoint, hidden behind an overgrown lot and a rusted-out gas station. No cameras, no neighbors, no questions. They holed up in room 7, the walls thin as paper, the only light coming from a flickering bedside lamp. Daniel sat across from Laura, who clutched a battered blanket around her shoulders like armor. She hadn't spoken much since they fled the warehouse. Her face was pale, bruised with exhaustion. "Talk to us," Daniel said quietly. "We need to know everything." Laura took a shaky breath, eyes darting between him and Denton, as if weighing whether she could trust them with the horrors she carried. Finally, her voice broke through the silence. "It started small," she said. "Travis ran low-level jobs for Boyd Lasker, moving cash, laundering money. I thought he was just another deadbeat boyfriend. I didn't know." She swallowed hard. Until one night, he came home covered in blood. Laura's hands twisted the blanket tighter. He killed a man, someone who owed Lasker. Travis wasn't supposed to get his hands dirty. It was messy, sloppy, and Lasker was furious. That was when Laura saw her chance. Afraid for her own life and desperate to get out, she went to a friend, a part-time sheriff's deputy, and offered to turn informant. In exchange for protection, she fed the deputy names, drop locations, supply chains. For a few months it worked. Lasker's network took hit after hit until Travis found out. "He followed me," she whispered. "He saw me meeting my contact." Travis didn't confront her. Instead, he went to Lasker and spun a deal. He would fake Laura's death in a way that looked convincing enough to fool everyone, especially law enforcement. Lasker would get rid of a potential rat. Travis would take over a piece of the business, and no one would come looking. "But they needed a body," Laura said hollowly. Boyd Lasker, once her would-be protector if things went bad, was betrayed by his own men, drugged and left in her car. His body was burned beyond recognition. "I had to watch from the trees," she said, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. "I watched as they set the car on fire with him inside. They made me watch." Daniel sat frozen, unable to speak. "And after that?" Denton pressed gently. "I became property," Laura said flatly. "Travis and Roy, they passed me between their contacts, changed my name, moved me from town to town. I was leverage, insurance. If I ever talked, they'd send proof to the authorities framing me for Boyd's murder." Laura's voice cracked. "And Daniel, they promised they'd kill you too." The room fell into heavy silence. Denton leaned forward. "Laura, tonight we got everything we need to put them away. If we move fast, we can protect you. Clear your name." "But we have to move," Daniel said, voice thick. "Now, before they find us." Through the thin walls, the whine of a distant engine echoed, a car slowing down outside. Daniel, Denton, and Laura froze. "They found us," Laura whispered. The car's headlights swept across the cracked parking lot, cutting through the darkness like a blade. Daniel dropped to the floor instinctively, pulling Laura down with him. Denton darted to the window, careful to stay below the sill, and peeled back the faded curtain a few inches. Two figures stepped out of the sedan, heavyset, purposeful, armed. "Roy and Travis," Denton confirmed grimly. Daniel's heart pounded. They weren't here to scare them. They were here to clean up loose ends. Laura trembled beside him, but her jaw tightened in a way Daniel hadn't seen in years. She wasn't the same woman who had once laughed freely in their kitchen. She was someone forged in fear and survival. Denton whispered sharply, "Bathroom window. Go." There was no time to think. Daniel grabbed the battered duffel containing the camera and the evidence, slinging it over his shoulder. Laura crawled ahead of him, and Denton covered their retreat, gun drawn. As Laura squeezed through the narrow bathroom window, the motel room door burst open with a deafening crack. Travis bellowed something unintelligible, the sound of a man who expected blood. Daniel shoved Laura through and scrambled after her just as bullets punched through the flimsy walls. They hit the ground behind the motel, sprinting into the choking darkness. Behind them, Roy shouted, "They're running! Get them!" The parking lot exploded into chaos. Doors slamming, engines revving, headlights flaring into life. Daniel, Laura, and Denton plunged into the woods beyond the motel, using the tangle of trees for cover. Branches whipped at their faces, thorns tore at their clothes. "We have to split up," Denton hissed. "They can't catch all of us." "No!" Daniel barked. "We stay together!" But it was too late. A bullet clipped a tree inches from Denton's head, forcing him to dive in one direction, while Daniel and Laura bolted another. For endless minutes, Daniel dragged Laura through the underbrush, lungs burning, legs screaming for rest. Only when the sounds of pursuit grew distant did he risk stopping. Laura collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Daniel knelt beside her, pulling her close. "We're not giving up," he said fiercely. "You hear me? We're almost there." From the darkness, Denton's voice called out in a harsh whisper. "Over here." They found him crouched beneath a low bridge near the dried-up riverbed, hidden from sight. He was bleeding from a gash across his forehead, but alive. Breathless and bloodied, they regrouped, staring at one another. Three people tied together by a nightmare that wasn't over yet. Denton checked the camera. Miraculously, the footage had survived. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "We take this to the FBI field office in Omaha. No local cops, no one who could be dirty." Daniel nodded. "And what about tonight?" Denton smiled grimly. "We stay invisible, and we pray Travis and Roy don't get lucky." Above them, distant sirens wailed. Whether from the motel or something worse, none of them knew. But in Daniel's gut, a darker fear gnawed. Travis and Roy weren't going to run. They were going to hunt. Dawn bled across the horizon in thin, sickly colors as Daniel, Laura, and Denton staggered onto a desolate service road, shivering from the cold. Every noise, every distant engine rumble or shifting shadow set their nerves on edge. The old sedan Denton had stashed nearby still sat hidden behind an abandoned barn, a thin layer of frost clinging to the windshield. They piled in without a word. Daniel behind the wheel, Laura in the passenger seat, Denton in the back clutching the precious duffel. "Stay off main highways," Denton instructed. His voice was tight with pain. The gash on his forehead had darkened into an ugly bruise. "We use back roads. No stops unless we have to." Omaha was 2 hours away, but every mile felt like an eternity. Daniel's eyes flicked constantly between the cracked asphalt and the rearview mirror. The battered sedan was slow, but discreet. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, hunted through the empty stretches of farmland and broken fences. Laura sat stiffly beside him, her hands twisted into knots in her lap. She hadn't said much since the motel. Daniel understood. There weren't words big enough for the guilt she carried, or the danger still looming over them. 30 miles out from Omaha, Denton muttered a curse. A black pickup truck appeared in the mirror, closing fast. "It's them," Denton said. "They're tailing us." Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. "Options?" "Lose them before we hit the city," Denton said grimly. "We can't lead them straight to the FBI." The pickup closed the distance, headlights flashing once, twice. A signal, not a warning, a threat. Daniel yanked the wheel, veering off onto a narrow side road choked with potholes and mud. The sedan lurched wildly, tires spitting gravel. Behind them, the pickup followed. "Faster!" Laura cried. Daniel pushed the battered engine to its limits. The landscape blurred, frost-rimed fields whipping past. The road narrowed further, becoming little more than a dirt trail. "They're gaining!" Denton shouted. "We have to ditch the car!" Ahead, Daniel spotted a break in the trees, an overgrown hiking trail leading into dense woods. He didn't hesitate. He jammed the brakes, the sedan skidding sideways. Doors flew open. "Move!" Denton barked. They sprinted into the trees, stumbling over roots and frozen underbrush. Behind them, doors slammed as Roy and Travis gave chase. Bullets ripped through the trees, thudding into trunks and sending splinters flying. Laura cried out but kept running, Daniel gripping her hand. Denton fell back, firing 2 quick shots to slow their pursuers, not to kill, just to buy time. They crashed deeper into the woods, heartbeats roaring louder than gunfire. Daniel spotted a half-collapsed hunting cabin through the trees, shelter, a place to regroup. "In there!" he shouted. They tumbled inside, slamming the broken door shut behind them. The cabin reeked of mold and old rot, but it had walls and one way in. Laura slumped against the far wall, gasping for breath. Denton reloaded grimly. "We hold here. We end this." Outside, Travis's voice rang out, mocking and cold. "You can't hide forever!" The air inside the cabin was damp and cold, heavy with the smell of mildew. Daniel crouched behind an overturned table, gripping a rusted metal rod he'd yanked from the cabin's collapsed bed frame. Denton, bleeding and grim, crouched by the door with his handgun raised. Laura huddled low in a corner, clutching the duffel bag like a lifeline. Outside, footsteps crunched through the dead leaves. Travis's voice called out again, slow and mocking. "Come out, Laura. Let's end this nice and easy." Daniel's heart pounded against his ribs. Not a chance. There was a sharp crack, gunfire, and the top corner of the door exploded into splinters. Denton didn't flinch. He peered through a gap in the wood, calculating, patient. "We're not getting out of here clean," he muttered. "They're going to smoke us out." Daniel looked around desperately. No phone service, no backup. Just 3 people against 2 ruthless men armed to the teeth. Another shot rang out, hitting the window frame just inches from Daniel's head. Glass shattered over them. "We have to do something," Laura gasped. Denton nodded grimly. "We need to divide them. If we stay boxed in, we die." A plan formed between them in frantic whispers. Daniel and Denton would create a distraction at the front. Laura, small and quick, would slip out the back and run through the woods, circle wide toward the road if she could. "You're the one they want," Denton said. "If you stay, they'll never stop shooting." Laura's face twisted in terror, but she nodded. Daniel grabbed her hand. "Stay low. Stay hidden. We'll find you." She squeezed his hand once, fiercely, then vanished through the broken rear wall into the trees. Denton turned to Daniel. On three. They threw open the door, firing blindly into the trees. Shouts erupted. Roy cursed and stumbled back, and Travis fired wildly in response. It worked. Roy split off, chasing after Laura. Travis, snarling, advanced toward the cabin alone, gun raised. Daniel ducked back just as a bullet ripped through the doorframe where his head had been. "Come on out!" Travis roared. "Or I'll burn that shack to the ground!" Inside, Denton pulled a battered flare gun from the duffel, an emergency tool from his PI days. "Time to even the odds," he muttered. As Travis closed in, Denton fired the flare directly at the dry underbrush by the tree line. Flames licked upward instantly, smoke billowing thick into the cold air. Travis cursed and stumbled back, distracted, and for a brief moment, exposed. Daniel didn't think. He charged forward, slamming into Travis with the full force of 5 years of grief and fury. They crashed into the dirt, grappling viciously. Travis swung the butt of his gun, catching Daniel across the temple, but Daniel fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. The gun skittered away into the leaves. Travis punched. Daniel punched back harder. Blood slicked Daniel's face, but adrenaline carried him. Finally, with a roar, Daniel slammed Travis's head into the frozen ground once, twice, until the bigger man sagged, unconscious. Daniel staggered to his feet, breathing raggedly. Behind him, Denton yelled, "Go! Laura's still out there!" They couldn't celebrate, couldn't waste time. Roy was still hunting Laura, and Roy wasn't the type to take prisoners. The woods burned behind them as Daniel and Denton plunged back into the night, hearts hammering. Smoke thickened the night air, turning every breath into a burning rasp. Daniel tore through the woods, Denton close behind, leaves and branches slashing at their faces and arms. "Laura!" Daniel shouted into the choking haze. No answer, only the distant crackle of fire and the frantic, disjointed sounds of pursuit. Denton gritted his teeth. He's hunting her. He'll try to isolate her, make it quick. Daniel's fists clenched. Not if I find her first. Ahead, a scream pierced the darkness, raw and terrified. Laura. Daniel surged forward, pain forgotten, lungs screaming. He broke into a clearing just as he saw Roy dragging Laura by the arm, a gun pressed tight against her ribs. She fought viciously, kicking and thrashing, but Roy was too strong. At the sight of Daniel, Roy grinned, a cold, savage expression. "Drop it!" Denton barked, leveling his weapon. Roy didn't flinch. "You're too late," he sneered. "You should have stayed buried with the rest of the garbage." Daniel moved instinctively, stepping between Roy and Laura, even as Roy cocked the gun. "Let her go," Daniel said, voice low, steady. "You're finished, Roy. We've got everything." Roy's finger tightened on the trigger. "No, you're finished." A shot rang out, but it wasn't Roy's. Denton's bullet caught Roy high in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The gun clattered to the ground. Laura jerked free and scrambled toward Daniel, sobbing. Roy dropped to his knees, gasping, blood soaking his jacket. But even wounded, he reached for a blade tucked at his belt. Daniel didn't hesitate. He tackled Roy, the two of them rolling across the frozen ground, fists and elbows flying. Rage boiled up from deep inside, years of grief, betrayal, fear, all coalescing into a brutal need to end it. Roy fought dirty, gouging, biting, clawing. But Daniel fought harder. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. With a final roar, Daniel wrenched the blade from Roy's hand and drove his knee into Roy's chest, pinning him down. Roy coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. His eyes, once gleaming with cruelty, dulled. Denton moved in, gun trained steady. "It's over, Roy!" For a moment, everything was silent except the crackle of fire and the ragged breaths of the living. Laura fell into Daniel's arms, shaking uncontrollably. He held her tight, whispering, "It's over. You're safe now." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Not the local cops this time. Federal agents Denton had managed to alert through a burner phone just before the siege began. Daniel looked down at Roy, who lay motionless on the ground. One enemy down. But the fight wasn't over yet. The network that had destroyed their lives, the remnants Travis and Roy were just a part of, still existed in the shadows. And unless they delivered the evidence, it would never truly end. "Come on," Denton said, voice hoarse. "We've still got a story to tell." Daniel nodded, helping Laura to her feet. They limped toward the distant flashing lights, battered, broken, but alive, and determined. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the woods in eerie, jerking shadows. Federal agents, real ones, not the compromised local police, swept the area with military precision, weapons drawn, faces grim. Daniel, Laura, and Denton staggered into the open, hands raised. They were quickly surrounded, but after a tense exchange and a review of Denton's earlier call for assistance, the agents lowered their weapons and moved to secure the scene. Roy, barely conscious, was cuffed and dragged onto a stretcher. Travis, found unconscious near the burned-out cabin ruins, was loaded into another. Both men were now federal prisoners, but their reach had ended hours ago. An agent with a lined, tired face approached. His badge read Special Agent Conrad Lewis. "You the ones Denton called about?" Denton, bloodied but unbroken, nodded. "We have the evidence. It's all in there." He motioned toward the battered duffel bag. Lewis took the bag carefully, handing it off to a second agent who disappeared into a mobile command unit already humming with activity. "You three are coming with us," Lewis said. "We'll get you protection, but you're not walking away clean. There's a lot of explaining to do." Daniel squeezed Laura's hand. She didn't resist. She looked hollow but resolute. The ride to Omaha passed in heavy silence. Laura sat pressed against the window, the distant city lights reflected in her eyes. Unreachable, almost surreal. At the field office, the process began. Hours of debriefings, sworn statements, photos. Laura was photographed, fingerprinted, processed. Not as a criminal, but as a witness, a survivor. Still, the facts were messy. A faked death, a staged crime scene. Involvement, however unwilling, in an organized crime operation. Federal law didn't look kindly on any of it, even when survival was the motive. Laura's fate wasn't entirely in her hands. An exhausted public defender explained the possibilities. Witness protection, conditional immunity, years living under a new identity, this time sanctioned by the government, not by fear. Daniel fought to stay calm as they led Laura away for further interviews. She paused at the doorway, turning back once to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. Daniel shook his head. She had nothing to apologize for. She had survived when survival was nearly impossible. Denton sat beside him in the waiting room, rubbing his bruised forehead. "We saved her," he said quietly. "It's not perfect, but it's better than a grave." Hours later, Agent Lewis returned. "You two," he said to Daniel and Denton. "You're free to go, for now." Daniel surged to his feet. "And Laura?" Lewis hesitated. "She'll be transferred into federal custody tonight. We're finalizing her placement. She won't be going back to Fairpoint or Clearwater. She'll be someone else." Daniel's throat closed. "But she can testify?" Denton asked. Lewis nodded. "If it comes to trial, and it will, her testimony, plus your evidence, will rip open a lot of rot. It won't fix everything, but it's a start." Daniel left the field office with the cold Omaha wind cutting into him like knives. He didn't feel victory. He felt hollow, as if part of him was being buried all over again. Laura was alive. But he had lost her a second time, and this time, there was no grave. Only a name that would never be spoken again. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of interviews, court filings, and endless waiting. Daniel remained in Omaha under federal advisement, housed in a nondescript apartment near downtown, isolated, anonymous, constantly watching over his shoulder. Denton checked in periodically, offering updates when he could. The FBI had launched a wide-scale investigation based on the evidence Laura, Daniel, and Denton had gathered. Arrests were happening in waves, not just low-level smugglers, but officials, warehouse owners, and even an assistant district attorney from a nearby county who had been laundering money for Roy's operation. The media caught wind of a major organized crime crackdown, but Laura's name never surfaced. As promised, she had been erased from the public record. Daniel should have felt a measure of satisfaction, but most nights, he sat alone at the small kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from him, drowning in memories. One cold evening in early February, a plain envelope slipped through the mail slot at his apartment. No return address. Inside, A single sheet of paper. It read, "She's safe. She remembers. Thank you. L." Daniel sat frozen, the simple words blurring before his eyes. He pressed the note to his chest, willing himself not to fall apart. It was the only communication he would ever get from her, the only proof that somewhere, somehow, Laura was alive and thinking of him. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was everything he had. The trial against Travis, Roy, and a dozen other network members was set for late spring. Laura's recorded deposition, filmed under heavy guard at a secure site, would serve as one of the key pieces of evidence. Denton had received threats, anonymous calls, a brick through his motel window. But he refused protective custody. "I didn't come this far to hide," he told Daniel with a grim smile. Daniel wasn't as sure. He slept with a chair jammed under the door handle. He checked every car twice before getting inside. The network's roots were deep, and even as the FBI tore it down piece by piece, Daniel knew better than to think he was truly safe. One night, Denton met him at a deserted diner outside Omaha. "They're cleaning house," Denton said, stirring his coffee distractedly. "But it'll take years to fix all the damage." Daniel didn't reply. "You thinking about leaving?" Denton asked. Daniel shrugged. "Nothing to stay for." Denton studied him for a long moment, then slid a battered business card across the table. "Small town down south. New start, quiet. I know the sheriff, no questions asked." Daniel turned the card over in his hand. Leaving meant letting go. It meant accepting that Laura was alive, but no longer his. He wasn't sure he was ready, but he wasn't sure he could survive if he stayed. Outside the diner, the night was cold and sharp, full of unseen dangers. Daniel slipped the card into his pocket. He still had choices. And for the first time in a long, long while, he intended to make them for himself. Spring crept into Omaha with muddy sidewalks and gray, endless rain. The courthouse downtown, a brutalist block of concrete and glass, loomed larger with each passing day. The United States v. Travis Cole, Roy Peterson and Associates officially began on a dreary Monday morning. Daniel sat 3 rows from the front, civilian clothes, eyes hollow. He wasn't a direct witness in the criminal charges. The FBI wanted to shield him from exposure, but he was allowed to observe. Denton sat beside him, stiff-backed, eyes constantly scanning the room. In the defendant's box, Travis looked smaller than Daniel remembered. No longer the monster in the woods, but a battered, defeated man in a wrinkled suit. Roy was absent, still recovering in a federal medical facility, possibly permanently paralyzed from the gunshot wound Denton inflicted. It was a slow, brutal march through evidence, surveillance footage, ledgers Denton recovered, testimony from minor accomplices who had cut deals. Laura's taped deposition played in grim, clinical detail for the jury. Daniel watched, heartbreaking, as Laura's face flickered on the screen, pale, composed, a ghost of the woman he once knew. Her voice, though steady, carried a tremor when she recounted the night of the fake crash, the murder of Boyd Lasker, the years of running. The courtroom was dead silent. Travis stared straight ahead, unblinking. The prosecutor wove a damning narrative, connecting Roy and Travis to trafficking, arms deals, and obstruction of justice. More than once, Daniel noticed defense attorneys exchanging whispered, frantic notes. The case was crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence, but the danger wasn't over. Late one evening, after a grueling day of testimony, Daniel returned to his apartment to find the door ajar. His blood froze. Inside, nothing was taken. Nothing obvious disturbed, except for a single bullet casing left in the center of the kitchen table. A message. He wasn't safe. Not yet. Denton, when called, showed up 10 minutes later, a grim look on his face. "They're sending a signal. Someone still loyal to the old network." Daniel stared at the casing, bile rising in his throat. "They know where I live." "Then you don't live here anymore," Denton said flatly. "Pack what you can. Tonight." Within an hour, Daniel was moved into a safe house under federal supervision. No phones, no internet, no visitors, a cage for his own protection. The trial ground on for another week. Daniel followed it through heavily redacted updates from Denton. Finally, on the 11th day of proceedings, the jury returned. guilty, on all counts. Daniel didn't feel triumph, only a hollow, bone-deep exhaustion. In the aftermath, Agent Lewis met with him and Denton privately. "We're wrapping up the loose ends," he said, "but there will always be risks, even with Travis and Roy neutralized." Daniel knew what he meant. There would always be someone who remembered, someone who blamed. "You have a choice," Lewis said. "Protective relocation, new identity, clean start, or stay and live looking over your shoulder." Daniel thought of Laura, of Denton, battered but unbowed, of the empty grave where his old life used to be. "I'll think about it," he said, but he already knew. Some ghosts weren't meant to be outrun. The safe house smelled of stale air and cheap disinfectant. The windows were sealed shut, the furniture sparse and functional. A place meant for waiting, not for living. Daniel sat at the chipped kitchen table, a single envelope in front of him. Inside was everything. A new name, a new social security number, a new life in a town so small it barely registered on maps. Clean slate, anonymity guaranteed. All he had to do was sign. Agent Lewis leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. He didn't push. The choice was Daniel's alone. Across the room, Denton sat slumped in an armchair, an untouched cup of coffee cooling on the side table. His face was a roadmap of exhaustion, scars old and new tracing his weathered skin. "You taking the offer?" Daniel asked quietly. Denton shook his head. "No, I'm staying. Too old to start over, I've made peace with my ghosts." Daniel nodded slowly. Denton had built his life on digging up the truth, no matter the cost. Running would be like tearing out his own spine. Daniel wasn't sure he was built the same way. He thought about Clearwater, about the grave with Laura's name carved into the stone, about the house that sat rotting, filled with broken memories. He thought about Laura's note. "She's safe. She remembers. Thank you." A clean break might be the only way forward, not for revenge, not for justice, but for survival. "I'll do it," Daniel said finally, his voice rough but steady. "New name, new start." Lewis gave a single nod and slid a second folder onto the table. Instructions, contacts. The first month of staged movements to shake any potential tails. After that, Daniel would be on his own. That night, Daniel burned every trace of his old life. Photos, letters, records, even the battered wallet he'd carried for 15 years. He watched the flames lick up the edges of a photo of him and Laura on their wedding day. Young, happy, stupidly believing the future was something they could control. When the ashes cooled, Daniel packed a single duffel bag and walked out of the safe house without looking back. At the handoff point, a nondescript government car waited. Denton stood by the door, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. "This is goodbye," Denton said, voice low. "For real this time." Daniel offered a hand, but Denton pulled him into a rough, one-armed hug. "Stay smart," Denton muttered. "Stay alive." "You too," Daniel whispered. Then he climbed into the car and pulled the door shut. The driver, a federal agent Daniel had never met before, said nothing, just drove into the night, headlights carving a thin path through the darkness. Daniel didn't ask where they were going. It didn't matter anymore. Behind him, Daniel Whitmore ceased to exist. Ahead of him, a man with no past and no promises waited to figure out who he was going to become. And somewhere out there, Laura was breathing under a different sky, living a life she had earned at a cost no one would ever fully understand. That had to be enough. It was the only thing that was real. The town was so small it didn't have a proper welcome sign, just a faded wooden board at the edge of a winding two-lane highway, Crescent Hollow, population 1,342. Daniel, though that wasn't his name anymore, arrived with a single duffel bag and a stack of fabricated history. The safe house had turned into a bus station. The bus station into this, a low-rent apartment above a bait shop that smelled permanently of river water and old cigarettes. No one asked questions in Crescent Hollow. No one cared about the past. A man could work odd jobs, drink cheap coffee, nod politely at neighbors, and be left alone. It suited him. He worked days hauling equipment for a small construction crew. Evenings, he walked along the edge of the river, letting the wind pull at the edges of memory. There were no photographs in his apartment, no mail but bills, no visitors but silence. It wasn't a life anyone would envy, but it was life. Spring rolled into summer, and with it, Daniel began to stitch something resembling routine. The ache in his chest dulled but never disappeared. Sometimes, in the quiet between dusk and full dark, he imagined Laura somewhere under the same stars, maybe laughing, maybe walking a dog she always wanted but never had, free, at peace. It was enough to keep him moving. One evening, at a crumbling picnic table by the riverbank, Daniel pulled a battered notebook from his jacket, the only real possession he'd smuggled through the change. Inside were simple things, a list of books Laura had once loved, recipes they'd planned to try, names of places they dreamed of visiting. He added one final entry that night. Laura Whitmore, loved, survived, gone, but never erased. He closed the notebook gently, hands steady. Some lives weren't about grand endings or perfect justice. Some lives were about surviving the storm and choosing again and again not to drown in it. As the sun sank low over Crescent Hollow, Daniel stood, the river whispering at his feet. He tucked the notebook into his jacket and turned back toward the life he was building, fragile, imperfect, but real. Behind him, the river carried his old name away into the endless dark. Ahead of him, a road unmarked by graves or memories waited quietly. For the first time in a long, brutal while, Daniel walked forward without looking back.